Hello,
Hi.
I'm Kat Sarfas, a forever bookseller at Barnes& Noble. Today we are joined by the lovely Hannah Whitten. Hannah is the author of the highly acclaimed and best-selling For the Wolf, a former speculative fiction pick here at BNN, and For the Throne, the eagerly awaited sequel and conclusion to the Wilderwood duology. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I'm
So
excited.
I think I first fell in love with For the Wolf the first time I saw the cover. And I know you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. I know this. But it is stunning. Yeah, it like immediately draws you in. And then it gets even better because then you get into the book. And you sort of waste no time like captivating your readers. We're sort of immediately thrown into this intense and intimate moment where Red is essentially preparing for her sacrifice. So like, yay.
As you do, yeah.
As you do. I'm not really surprised that Wolf became quite a darling on sort of the bookstagram, book talk scene. There's a lot of fire and passion fandom over there. Obviously, this is your debut. So what, on top of being a debut, and then all of everything else, what has that experience been like for you? Sort of, this fandom. I mean, I can't, like the fan art alone is just like.
Wild.
Yeah.
Is the very eloquent way that I can describe it. It was completely unexpected. Yeah, I mean, everybody, hopes that your book is gonna like find a home with people and really find the people that it connects to. But it happened, and it happened really fast, and I was not expecting it. And it's just been kind of a whirlwind to be taken on the journey of like people tagging me and just really cool stuff. My favorite thing I think that people have made is candles. Like there have been so many like Wilderwood candles. And people are usually like really nice and will like send me a DM and be like, can I send you one of these? I'm like, absolutely you can.
Like add it to the collection.
Seriously, I have a collection and I always like save the jars because then I like put plants in them. So I have like
it's nice to hear someone who saves the jars and then actually does something with them, because I am often the person who's like, I'm going to save this jar and I'm going to do something with it, and then it sits in my cabinet for like.
Well, I will say that like because they're like for my book is really the only reason that I have made sure that I do, because I am that same person that I'm like, oh, this is a cool jar, I'm going to save it. Like not even candles, just jars of anything. I'm like,
jars
I like
in general.
This jar. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I feel like I should keep it.
Yes. Like at one point, maybe I'll just bring them all out and just have a collection of jars, because that seems to be where
I have done that. I do have many surfaces of my home that are just like fancy jars with
fancy jars. So, I mean, that's amazing. I love that. Like, again, just the fan art, the people rallying around this book. I love that. I love this community of intensely passionate book lovers. It's so welcoming and just refreshing. I mean, social media obviously has its like ups and downs, but this has just been like, it's just wonderful. I think it's such a safe space. I think it's such a wonderful place for people to discover writers and books and stories, and then basically express their fandom by sending you candles.
By sending you candles.
That I can't think of anything better. Getting now into retellings. Yes. Obviously retellings, reimaginings around everything. So fairy tales, mythology, folklore, like it's anyone's game right now. Like it's like whatever you want to do. But it's obviously having a very fantastic moment, and it's kind of lovely to see these sort of like familiar stories take on a new life. Like I love that. I love there's always like characters or parts of the story you kind of, when you're reading them originally, you wish could go a different way, and then it's like, oh, it can. Like you can do whatever. Right. The Wilderwood series obviously nods to, Little Red Riding Hood. We've got like Beauty and Beast in there, Snow White. It's so obviously has this magic all its own that you've created in this universe, this world. What is it about these stories? So these fairy tales, these folklores, they like linger in that subconscious. Like I can't remember what I had. Most people can't remember what they had for breakfast, but they could remember every fairy tale, or like ask them about like why are we so drawn to these tales?
I think that a lot of it is because many times, the folklore of the culture that you're in is kind of the first stories that you hear. So it just like sticks in your brain and really plants itself in there as like a core story memory. I think that's a big part of it. And another aspect is that they're so archetypal. Like if you break fairy tales kind of down into their composite parts, there's a lot of similarities, even like across cultures, which I think is really, really cool. Cinderella in particular, there's like so many different Cinderella stories, like from all corners of the world. So obviously there's something that is very like human about these archetypes because we keep coming back to them and retelling them in different ways. So I think that they're just kind of things that people reach for very instinctually.
Yeah.
Whether or not you're like setting out to be like, I am going to retell this fairy tale or remix this folk tale or something like that. Even when you're writing something original that's not intended to be something like that, you still kind of reach for those tropes and archetypes to help you make sense of the idea.
It's interesting that you were talking about tropes, because I feel like tropes are such a big, it's something that we're talking about. So, and so much, it's like enemies lover. And it's like, where did obviously these tropes came from somewhere. So it's like these tropes that we love so much, everything has its sort of like origin story. I imagine a lot of us sort of come to these, like you were saying, come to these fairy tales, these folklores. Obviously, if it, different folklores, if it's like a cultural thing, those are the sort of the first stories that we're hearing. For others, I think it's, we sort of often enough come to them, these sort of sugar-coated, watered-down Disney adaptations. Unfortunately, obviously there's like good and bad.
Yeah, I mean, like the classic Disney fairy tales are the bedrock of a lot of people's first experiences with story. Like that's how it is.
That's exactly. It's like for better or worse or whatever it is. Yeah. Then obviously you grow and you discover new things, and you kind of, I think it's always fun. Like when you hear, like, I think for me, like talking about Cinderella, the first time I read like the actual Cinderella, and it is blood and it's like gory, and you're kind of like, what is happening here? As we get older, we learn new things. We have a lot of awakenings. So I kind of very much enjoyed how Red is sort of raised to believe this one story, and obviously she is at the center of it, in a way, sort of without question. Like it's just, this is what we're doing. I mean, not without question. I guess she does question. I mean, her and like, but, but she does question.
She questions to the point, and then it's like, does it matter? Not really.
Exactly. Yeah. So I guess it's like there's questions, but it's sort of like, well, this is how it is. And this is everyone around me. Like that we're all pushing towards one direction, and this is where we're going with this. Only to discover that there's always more to the truth. And I think that's a life lesson that we all kind of stumble upon it at some point. What was your inspiration to sort of take the story in that direction, to have it be this sort of discovery, this awakening in a way, and then have that sort of lead into everything else?
So it was kind of mirroring my own experiences of that kind of awakening moment where, start to question the stories and the values that you were raised with. And even kind of having that hopeless moment that Red has, where she's like, well, does it matter if it's not true? Because I still have to like live within this framework. So that was definitely an inspiration. The reason that I wanted to kind of mess with Little Red Riding Hood in particular is because it is such a morality tale. It's the original telling of like not straying from the path, very much about like lust and bodily autonomy, and things that I wanted to mess with and twist around on its axis and see how I could take something like that and make it say the opposite, in the way that Wolf itself is kind of lumping a bunch of different fairy tales together, stripping them down to parts, and then putting those parts back together in different ways. I wanted the true story of Red's world that she's learning while she's in the Wilderwood to kind of be the same thing, where all the parts are there, but they're just put together in very different ways than she was taught. It's an understandable thing where you're like playing a game of telephone and it's just so much context is getting lost along the way.
I love fantasy. It's probably like, if I hate to say like you hate to pick a favorite, but I'm going to pick a favorite like genre, like that you kind of gravitate towards. It's like my safe space. What I love so much about it, and I'm sure, and even within these books, is that you can weave this beautiful tapestry, and it's like everything, ancient magic, historical references, folklore, let's throw in some political intrigue. Let's have some, theological tensions in here. Like, let's go on, like bodily autonomy. Like we can discuss like sort of these topics in this space. And I love to hear like different opinions of this, because like I always think, what is it about fantasy that sort of offers this like perfect canvas to explore these stories into what you were saying, like that you want to take these very real issues and kind of be able to lay them out in a way that maybe is easy for people. I don't know if it's easier for, everyone, for you to absorb. I mean, obviously in this book also deals, there's some like survivor's guilt. There's this PTSD. It's like, there's these things that, obviously topics we need to talk about, topics we just need to share and be open with. But then, yeah. So what is it, again, I'm getting off topic, but what is this? What is it about fantasy? And that allows us to sort of play in a way.
I think that the draw for fantasy in particular with those things is being able to make stuff that is very heady literal. The forest as a metaphor in folklore in general is like a place of transformation. Like the person who goes in is not the person who goes out. And so I just made it literal. Let's use that to, like, you go in and you literally can't come back out, and kind of use that to talk about personal transformation and like societal transformation and why context gets like lost and communication breaks down whenever you have these barriers in place. So yeah, you can just take all of these things that like in the real world, whenever you're trying to like talk to someone about them or discuss them, you get very in your head very quickly.
Yes.
Be like, but if you're like, okay, think about it like the woods, then it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Right. It just makes everything. Yeah. And I think I love that. I love, when you're reading a book and you're so entranced, obviously, like, there's a character and, maybe there's a romance and there's a mystery and like, yes, like those are, very alluring. And then all of a sudden, you can't help but like see all like the undercurrents, in terms of even like this whole sacrifice, this whole like not questioning, like just going, going forward. And it makes you kind of, all of a sudden you sort of translate everything to like, oh, well, this is kind of like where we're at now with this. Yeah. So kind of like where we're living with this.
And when you give people the option to kind of live inside the head of a different character, and you can kind of like sneak up on somebody.
Yes.
Because, if you're doing your job and you make it a character that they can see themselves in and they can empathize with, and then you kind of throw these things at them, and then it just changes the way that people think about something.
I love it. I love it. And that's, yeah. And I mean, not that you can't do this within other genres. I just personally feel like within the fantasy space, it's lovely.
I think speculative fiction just as a whole lends itself to that, because you aren't kind of constrained by real world rules.
Yes.
Real world rules. Say that 5 times.
Yes. And I love that. And I've heard like a lot of writers even say like so they can create, and it's, again, you're in your world building. So it's like you have the opportunity to sort of create a space where certain things exist or certain things don't exist. And then it's like, go, like how these characters sort of live within these confines. So love it. I know that I'm going to just like lump us all together. If any like millennial Gen Z writers sort of get their like first taste of writing or get their like start in fan fiction.
Yeah. Yep.
And so, which I love. And I was right there with you. Like, it's just, and I love that fan fiction, I think back to like when I was in high school, where it was like, like the secret sort of thing that you didn't really talk about, and you like maybe wrote about it on your live journal, but never shared, or like, and there's like a small, whatever. Yeah. And now it launches. Think about how many books have been launched from fiction, and authors have found their side. So I'm going to ask you, and I kind of already know the answer to this one because, I did some digging, but
right on the internet.
I want you to talk about it. So is there any fan fiction that we should know about? Anything floating in the universe? Anywhere that anything you want to talk about right now?
I have absolutely written fan fiction. I'm not going to like tell anybody what it is. I feel like if you have spent any time on any of my unfortunate social media outlets, but yes, I wrote some last year. Actually, it's very much like, and this is kind of getting into process, but follow with me. If writing is a muscle, then I try to like keep it going even whenever I'm on a break. So like if I'm waiting for edits, or I'm getting a pause from drafting or something, whenever I have a break, like I try to actually take a break for a couple weeks, but then I'll kind of like get the itch to write something.
And like off-season training.
Fiction is there for me. Yeah.
Right?
Cross training.
Yes.
So I will like just write a little one shot, throw it up on my very secret AO3 account and just not talk about it anywhere.
Just like it's here.
Will find the people it's meant to find.
If you really want to go to the dark corner, like if you're putting in the right search buttons.
So I still write it. I still read it. The very first book that I ever attempted whenever I was like 12 was essentially Lord of the Rings fan fiction, but it was before I like knew what fan fiction was.
Yes.
So I like just changed the names around and was like, yes, this is good. And clearly like I insert, it was a self-insert also, because what else am I going to write whenever I'm 12 years old? And so I was in the Fellowship of the Ring. I was an elf who was obviously in a love triangle with Legolas and Aragorn.
Of course. I mean.
And I'm honestly sad that like I wrote it on my parents' old dinosaur desktop that is long since gone to the grave. And sometimes I'm like, I wish I could find that and read it again. But then most of the time I'm glad that it's lost to posterity.
I too, like Lord of the Rings, I think was my first, or I mean, it was like The Hobbit, you know, and then like you get a little bit older and then you sort of read Lord of the Rings. And for me, like, I enjoyed The Hobbit, I'm not getting wrong, but then like Lord of the Rings was like, oof, like it just sort of like.
Lord of the Rings before I read The Hobbit, actually, because like I didn't read it as a kid. I didn't really know about it until the movies came out, because my parents were not big like fantasy or sci-fi people. Mm-hmm. Like they read like nonfiction and historical fiction. So, but the movies came out and I just hyperfixated very quickly. And so I read all of the books. I read the Silmarillion. I read like Children of Hurin whenever it came out, but it was my entire personality for a good few years. I'm like, I have an elvish tattoo on my leg. Like it's a lifestyle.
It is. And I can't like it's funny whenever I hear anyone talk about how like Lord of the Rings, like that was like their entry to fan fiction or their entry to fantasy. It's just, it was for like, especially when those, you know, if you hadn't read the books, even, and then, you know, and then the movies came out and it was like obsession. It was just lockers, like just pictures of like, just everything. And I remember like, just being completely in it. And I remember, my lovely friends made me like a Lord of the Rings fan fiction birthday cake, and they went to Carvel with like fan art, and I can only imagine that poor employee was like, "What is
okay?" Sure.
I'm
not getting paid enough for this.
Yes, and I remember, you know, just literally taking like from the movie, like the telecast, like the script, and like taking out names and inserting like my name in there, like just like you're like, I'm gonna put me in this story, and it was just it was so wonderful, and I love it, and I love that that was such
first OC, like
yes, I love that it's such a pinnacle entry point into fantasy and into I think it's just like this idea of being in world. I think, you know, and I think that's something that when we, you know, we read these books, we're so entrenched in them. And sometimes it's hard to, you know, you're kind of going about your daily life. And like, I feel like you're looking at these people like, you don't even know. Do you even know? Do you know what's happening? Like, how are you just walking around? So like, how
I am having a full crisis and you don't even know.
Yes, I'm having a crisis. I'm reading this book and I'm having a crisis. Do you know what's going on? You know, and obviously everyone is oblivious, you know, in your mind. But you want to be so in world, and this is just another way to sort of be in world. And I love that it's sort of it's sort of like taking off now, and you know, socially acceptable, not bitter at all that it wasn't 15 years ago, whatever. But you know, lovely to see it, and thank you. Thank you for still writing fan fiction, and thank you for admitting or talking about your earliest ventures into it.
My most embarrassing fan fiction venture I will share is that some friends and I in like middle school, I had a notebook that we would pass around, and we would take turns writing Daughters of the Moon.
Yes,
which was that book series, and they were small. They were only like this big, but there was like 20 of them.
Yes,
and so we all created our own Daughters of the Moon OCs and would write in this notebook and pass it around.
I love that.
Did get found like by someone not in our fan fiction group, and that was the end of that because we were very embarrassed. But
and that was the end. And
that was the end of that. And that's why it's like, that's why you put it on the internet.
Love it. All right. So speaking of, again, like thinking of like fan fiction, you're writing. I've heard you speak that, talking about of dreams and hopes and putting out those little manifestations into the universe. I think that this would be a wonderful adaptation for the screen. I'm just gonna put that out there. Just again, let's just like plant those seeds. Let's put out those good vibes. Just put them all out there. So, and I feel like I've seen this conversation like on your socials, and I just think it's so funny when I see you and your fans interact, and they kind of put their opinions out there. So, but I'm going to ask you now. So, your dream cast, or like everyone always loves to talk about, like the dream cast.
Yes. So I have options in my dream cast because I think about this a lot, and I'm like, I want to like have different strata, like. This is something that I think about a lot. So definitely like putting the feelers out in the universe there. But for that, the only person that I have ever like looked at and been like, that is red, is Florence Pugh.
She is just, obviously right now she is just amazing and doing such like incredible work.
Did we afford her? Who knows? Probably not. But but she's great. She would be amazing. Eamon's hard. Because I feel like that is kind of the casting that like whether it would work or not hinges on.
Yes.
So I have options.
Okay.
So first option would be Ben Barnes.
Ooh.
He's got the look.
He does.
He's got it going on. Adam Driver would be great, but again, probably can't afford him. Like See,
okay, this is supposed to be like, dream cast. Okay,
this is your dreams, but like I keep
I know, let's not bring reality into this. Don't bring reality into this.
Also, my like third option that I'm like, he would be a good Eamon is Oliver Jackson Cohen from The Haunting of Hill House.
Oh, okay.
He was the younger brother, Luke.
Yeah. And we've got options.
We got options. We got
good. It's good to have options.
Universe, we have options.
We have options.
Neve, I have always pictured Adelaide Kane from Rain. When she was
okay.
Earth and Rain, which is like the most ridiculous show, but I did love it very much.
Lot of drama.
Little to no sense, but I had a great time.
Yeah.
John Boyega would be a great Rafe. I picture and now I'm blanking on his name, but the guy that was Ichabod Crane in that Sleepy Hollow TV show.
Oh.
When Nicole Bahari. Tom Nyson.
Yes, I was going to I'm like, it's
I think I'm saying that right. I might be saying his last name incorrectly, but him specifically in that show with the hair, I'm like, that's Selmir right there.
Well, that's like kind of nice that he's, he already has the aesthetic. Like
listen, we just look. Get that like hairdresser again. You got it.
we need all of those parts. Okay, I love it. All right. So I hope the universe, I hope you're listening. I hope you heard all of that.
Everyone, light your candles.
light your fan fiction candles. Light your For the Wolf candles, and let's make it happen. So, the For the Throne sort of this is a duology.
It is.
Okay. So then this sort of For the Throne then concludes.
Okay.
Because I guess I like thought it was a duology, but then you're sort of hopeful. You're like, well,
I'm certainly not opposed to returning to the world eventually.
Ah.
So here's another thing to like push out into the universe.
I know. Okay. So obviously, this is For the Throne again, stunning cover. So we're going to be concluding the Wilderwood duology, and then we get to follow Neve, and which is just really exciting because it's just again like you're in like you're back in the world, but it's now it's just a new story, a new character. Well, not new, but like a new, someone, a different path. So I guess that my question was, is this the last we're going to see of the Wilderwood?
Officially, yes.
Officially, but unofficially, maybe. So that was my question. But also, what was the sort of the hardest part about? I know, like sometimes when you're like, it's like the first book is you get this thought, you get this spark, and you like run with it, and then it's you come back into this world, and over a sudden, it's a lot. It's a lot harder because now you have expectations. Now you have all this fandom. You have everything sort of swirling along with the story. So did you sort of have? So how was the process here? Did you have this story already like flushed out when you were sort of writing, like when it was one of those things where, you were writing for the book, but you sort of already had it, it was already mapped. So it wasn't as difficult to go back? Or when you started with this book, was it something where you were like, okay, like now this is okay?
Kind of both. So trying to plan Throne was difficult because I do try. I'm not like naturally a planner whenever I'm writing, but with like deadlines and stuff like that, I do try to like have a roadmap in mind.
Good.
And like brainstorm with like my agent and my editor to just, before I like sit down and, write 120,000 words, let's make sure that everybody thinks this works kind of thing. Like that just seems prudent for everyone. So that process was kind of hard. The ending, whenever I sat down to draft, changed.
Okay.
Because the original ending that I'd had, kind of whenever I started getting back into the headspace of the characters, that it didn't ring true and didn't seem like a just reward for what was going to happen. So because the Wilderwood books in particular are very character focused, it was less about like figuring out what I wanted to happen and more about making sure that I was in the head of the characters correctly and kind of making sure each action had an equal and opposite reaction.
Yeah.
And Neve has always been my favorite character to write. She was very difficult to write in Wolf particularly. But because she was hard to write and because I did have to spend kind of a lot of time revising her character in particular and really figuring out kind of what made her tick and why she did the things that she did. By the time I got around to drafting Throne, I had a really good handle on her as a character. And so like once I started drafting and like just kind of sat down and did the thing, it unspooled itself pretty easily. Yeah. So yes and no.
Yes and no. That's okay. That's fair.
Parts of it were hard, but for the most part, it came easier to me than I expected it to, honestly. Because you always hear about like sequel syndrome and how second books are so difficult. And so I was just ready to like have my ass kicked. Whatever it ended up being like easier than I thought it was going to be, I was like, am I doing this right? Like, have I done something extremely wrong and I'm just not getting it?
Like something is obviously wrong here.
This should not be this easy.
But I think I've heard you, or I've either heard you or I've read that you said that Neve was sort of like, that she was the character you connected with the most. Yeah. So then, it did that. I'm not completely surprised to hear you say that, because then, it is when you connect with the character, when you, getting it back in their head, or when if you're already there, then I imagine. Yeah. You're good.
Yeah, we got each other on a very deep level.
You're like, I got you, girl. We're gonna do this. It's gonna be good. And it is. It's wonderful. Thank you. So I don't think this is new news, and I apologize if it is new news to anybody listening. And if it is, then you need to go on Hannah's socials. Yeah, I'm sorry. Well, sorry, not sorry, because you need to be following Hannah. So you have something new on the horizon.
I do.
Yes. So the Foxglove King, which I kind of just like to say it. I feel like it feels very nice.
I love it so much. It's like the easiest a title has ever come to me.
Beautiful. So I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about this book, or what you can. Again, spoilers, whatever. What can you tell us? I'm very interested now to hear about the title, how that came, but also just what can you? Is it a series? Is it going to be a duology? What are we in for? What's this journey? What's happening?
It's a trilogy. So, and it's going to be a chunky trilogy.
a chunky trilogy. Oh my God, I love that.
I'm editing the first one right now, and it's like, this is a chunk of a book. So the Foxglove King is a trilogy. The trilogy's name is The Nightshade Crown. And it's in a whole different world than Wilderwood. It tends more toward like the epic fantasy, I think, than the Wilderwood books do. But it's very like a sword and sorcery kind of thing, but with a little extra flair. So it is set in a country called Auvergne, in a city called The Lord, that has catacombs underneath it. And in the catacombs are buried the goddess of death. Because there was this thing 500 years ago called the God's Fall, where she lost it and tried to kill her husband, the god of life, and all the other elemental gods also died. So, and we don't know where the god of life is anymore. Like, the church assumes he's still out there somewhere and have built this whole religion around the assumption that he's still out there somewhere, but nobody really knows. So that's like the background. Our main character is Lore. She is a poison runner. Because in Delaire, because of the buried goddess's body, the magic of death is just like leaking from the catacombs and into the city all the time.
Love that.
You like take poison, like poisonous flowers particularly, or what's in vogue, you might be able to use the power of death. Like, only those who have like died and come back, like had like a near-death experience like that, can channel it. It's called mortem. Can you tell that I haven't like had a chance to come up with like, here's my like elevator pitch for this? I'm just like, let me lay all of this out for you.
I'm fine with that. I'm
working on the elevator pitch.
Elevator pitches are great, but I also like the bits, like all like the bits you're saying. I'm like, okay, so
you're gonna get all the bits.
Yeah, so we've got the gods. We've got this again. The theological tensions, like
so much theological tension. Like, if you thought there was theological tension in Wilderwood, like, honey, you got a big storm coming. Like, we're doing the thing in this one. Okay, so Lore's a poison runner. She also secretly can channel mortem because secretly she was born in the catacombs. So
it's like twist.
Yeah, and so she's like escaped and fallen in with this like poison runner gang who essentially like they like provide poison to people, because if you take the poison, it does give you like a little bit of a high, but also if you are dosed correctly, it can add years to your life, because it essentially like pickles your organs.
Wow.
Where
that's
it's like,
interesting.
Like, it's not like a nice extra few years, because like your veins start turning to stone and like it's like not pretty. It's not a fun time, but it is like extra years. So people are into that. So you have some people who just take it for the high. You have some people who are trying to be able to channel mortem because it's, like the only magic left in the world. And you have some people that want to extend their life, like both for good and bad reasons. Yeah. So Lore's a poison runner, but she can channel mortem, and she gets caught because in like a drop gone wrong, she accidentally raises a horse back from the dead.
As you do. As happens.
It happens.
Again, this is why I love fantasy.
Among Us has not accidentally raised some livestock from the dead on accident. So she gets caught. She gets taken to the church, and the king, fully expecting to get like sent to prison, but they're like, actually, we need you to work for us, because there's this encroaching empire that is getting ever closer. And there are these mysterious deaths that are kind of happening toward the edge of like where the Empire and Auvergne meet. And so they want her to raise those people back from the dead and essentially ask them what happened. So she gets stuck in the court of the Citadel with Gabriel, who is a monk, or he's a duke turned monk with one eye and tattooed hands. Very important. Extremely important details. Who his father like betrayed the duchy that they had to the Carithian Empire, but then they killed him. They're like, cool, thanks for the land, bye. They killed him. They took out Gabe's eye whenever he was like 10. And so he had this near-death experience, and now he can also channel mortem. So essentially his only option was to join like the Presque Mort, which is this group of monks that can channel mortem, and they're not the only people who are allowed to do it. But he's actually a duke. And so the king is like, surprise, you have to stay here with her and be like her escort. And he's not pleased about it. our other main character is Bastion, who is the king's son, who is someone that lore is supposed to be keeping an eye on because they think that he's an informant. And he is also a disaster, actual, like, just ruinous man. Everyone is a menace.
Love it.
And everyone is just having a bad time, except me. I'm having a great time.
I'm having a great time writing all these villainous, like, ruinous.
Yes, like no one is like neutral good. Like, there's not. It is all on the chaotic side of the spectrum.
I love it. We're all like, yeah, everything was. So are we all like chaotic neutral, or are we like chaotic?
Most chaotic neutral. I think that Gabe, you could classify as like chaotic good.
Okay.
Or he might be more like true neutral. He's very like stoic.
I like to wake up and like decide where I am that day. Like, am I like,
what day am I having today?
Yeah.
What would serve you best?
Yeah. Like some people, it's like the equivalent of, I feel like, or I always say, I'm like, it's like the sword and sorcery version of like, I choose violence today. It's like, I'm choosing, I'm choosing to be chaotic evil today. Like,
the original idea came around. I hesitate to say this because then people will think it's sci-fi, but I got really mad at The Rise of Skywalker and wanted...
Let's be honest here. It's a safe space. It's a safe space.
So I kept thinking about, and I guess like spoilers for The Rise of Skywalker if you haven't seen it.
No. At this point, there's sometimes where I'm like,
recommend it, but if you haven't, you're going to. I got to thinking about how the idea, like, I wasn't opposed to the idea of Rey Palpatine if it had been like seeded in earlier and had been like something that we kind of built toward. And I was like, okay, well, what would that like villain arc look like? And so I put it in a fancy court setting and I added a love triangle because I could. And then I was like, poison flowers are cool. What if I like used that in it somehow? And the ones I decided that that's kind of like the magic system component that I wanted to use, like all the titles just kind of came very quickly.
It all just sort of fell into place.
Yeah. So like, I don't know if I'm allowed to like say the titles for the next two books, but they follow like the same naming convention.
Yeah. That's amazing. Okay. So I love this. I can't imagine anyone not loving this. And I love that you didn't have an elevator pitch because this was so much better.
Let me explain this to you in excruciating detail.
No, I want all of the excruciating details. That is just like, that's obviously, I'm here for it. So you're doing a lot. You're writing this book. You've got this book. This is the new one. We've got Foxglove King is coming. It's going to be a chunky trilogy, which is now my favorite phrase ever. And so I'm going to ask this question: I'm assuming you do, because you also talked about how flexing your writer muscles and you do a little fan fiction. So in all your spare time, what are you reading? What are you reading right now? What? Or I always say, what was the last thing you read that just was like blew
the last thing that I read was a historical romance, actually. Which I read a lot of. Also, I've been like watching Bridgerton for the first time because I am perpetually years behind media.
That's okay.
Just generally speaking.
Okay, but then you're good because you have two like right away. Then it's like you get two chunks.
Exactly. So I'm in the middle of season 2 right now, and I'm obsessed. So because of that, I've been reading historical fiction, like just to like scratch that itch. So I just finished The Hunter by Kerrigan Byrne, and it was excellent. I really like Kerrigan Byrne because like they're historical romances, but they're extremely angsty. So you've got almost like fantasy levels of angst, but within like a historical romance setting, which very into that. I'll like read that if I'm feeling angsty, and then I'll read Tessa Dare if I want to read historical romance, but really funny. So I'm just served all across the board. I've got whatever I need. I'm also currently reading Follow Me to Ground by Sue Rainsford.
Okay.
Which is interesting. It's very short. It's like less than 200 pages. And I bought it because of the cover. It has a really great cover.
Again, going back to the cover. Yeah. Like, I'm sorry, not sorry.
I bought it because of the cover, and it's been on my shelf for forever. And I am really particular about like organizing my bookshelves. And so I have one stack that has room for another book, but it had to be a very small book, like in my red stack. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to read this because it's like the perfect size to put in this red stack. But I am very much enjoying it. It's really creepy, which I wasn't anticipating how like creepy and uncomfortable it is, but I really like it.
I love that. It's, you know what? I feel like there's books and you just need to be in like the right time or place. And like that, like you said, exactly, like scratching that itch. Like I need, and I kind of always look at books like almost like food. So it's like you have your, you should really eat your vegetables and your healthy meals, but then it's okay to have a little chocolate. It's okay to have a little.
I love a brain candy book.
Yes, it's okay to have a little snack. And I will say that this series, I'm gonna put it again, bring him again. Just gonna come over here. I feel like scratches lots of itches, and so it's wonderful. You've got, there's romance, there's mystery. You've got, again, my other theological tensions, political intrigue, all of it, the historical references, folklore, mythology, retellings. It's all here. And I just can't thank you enough for writing this. And I hope that I mean it. Again, no spoilers. It is a complete story. It is wonderful as a duology, but if you ever have that itch to scratch and feel like coming back into the Wilderwood universe, I think all of us would be happy to accept that. We'd be happy to accept that gift.
I have thoughts and notions.
Yes. Hannah, thank you so much. Thank you again. This has been wonderful. For the Wolf, For the Throne are out now. Foxglove King is coming
soon. It has a cover. I just can't show you all yet. It's really good.
I know. I love it. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was so fun.
Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. The show is available on Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher. Please rate and review us wherever you listen to podcasts.